In the heart of rural Pennsylvania, where rolling hills met endless farmland, lived a middle-aged woman who had inherited her family's century-old farm. After serving 15 years in the military as a K-9 handler, she had returned home to tend to the land that had been in her family for generations. Her constant companions were two Belgian Malinois dogs, highly trained service animals who had worked alongside her during her final years of service. Life on the farm was peaceful but demanding. Each morning began before sunrise, with the farmer and her dogs making their rounds to check on the livestock and maintain the property. The main storage shed, a sturdy structure that housed expensive farming equipment and this season's harvest, stood at the edge of her property, partially hidden by a grove of old oak trees. The farmer had noticed some concerning changes in her quiet community over the past few months. Several neighboring farms had reported break-ins and vandalism, with equipment stolen and property damaged. Local law enforcement seemed overwhelmed by the sudden surge in rural crime, leaving farmers to fend for themselves. Being security-minded from her military background, she had installed motion-detected lights around the shed and other crucial areas of the farm. Her dogs, already naturally protective, had been specifically trained to patrol the property perimeter and alert her to any unusual activity. She knew their capabilities well. They weren't just pets, but highly disciplined working dogs with years of professional training. One particularly cold autumn evening, as darkness settled over the farm, the farmer was finishing up her paperwork in the kitchen. The harvest had been good this year, and the shed was full of valuable equipment and supplies. A cup of hot tea sat beside her as she logged the day's yields, with her dogs resting quietly at her feet. Suddenly, both dogs' ears perked up simultaneously. They lifted their heads, bodies tensing as they listened intently to something their owner couldn't yet hear. Years of working with these animals had taught her to trust their instincts implicitly. She quietly set down her pen and moved away from the kitchen light, allowing her eyes to adjust to the darkness outside. Through the window, she could see shadows moving near the storage shed. The motion lights hadn't activated yet, suggesting whoever was out there knew enough to stay just outside their range. Her dogs remained perfectly still, waiting for her command, their training evident in their controlled response to the potential threat. The farmer reached for her phone to call the local sheriff, knowing response times could be up to 30 minutes in their remote location. As she dialed, she watched three figures emerge from behind the shed, carrying what appeared to be crowbars and bolt cutters. Their movements were purposeful. This wasn't their first time doing this. The farmer's military training kicked in as she assessed the situation. She knew her dogs could handle themselves, but she wanted to avoid any unnecessary confrontation. Years of experience had taught her that the best victories came from strategic thinking, not brute force. She quickly formulated a plan that would utilize her dog's training while ensuring everyone's safety. Moving silently through her house, she retrieved their special tactical gear, reinforced vests equipped with bright LED lights. These weren't ordinary dog vests, they were specialized equipment from their service days, designed to be both protective and intimidating. The dogs remained perfectly still as she secured their gear, their breathing steady, their focus unwavering. Through the window, she could see the intruders had begun working on the shed's locks. Their flashlight beams bounced off the metal walls as they whispered to each other, clearly unaware of what awaited them. The farmer noticed their truck parked just beyond her property line, hidden behind a cluster of trees. They'd planned this well, but not well enough. She opened her back door silently, using the skills honed through countless military operations. The dogs moved alongside her like shadows, their paws making no sound on the damp grass. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and approaching winter. Perfect conditions for what she had in mind. The farmer positioned herself behind a large oak tree, about 50 yards from the shed. Her dogs understood their roles perfectly. They had practiced property protection scenarios countless times. She could see that the intruders had managed to break through the first lock and were working on the second. The contents of her shed, worth tens of thousands of dollars in equipment and harvest, were moments away from being stolen. With a simple hand signal, she commanded her dogs to take their positions. They split up, moving like liquid darkness through the shadows, circling around to flank the shed from both sides. The farmer pulled out her phone again, this time to activate the farm's secondary security system. She'd never had to use it before, but she was glad she'd installed it. The intruders had just broken through the second lock when she pressed the button. Instantly, powerful floodlights burst to life, bathing the entire area in brilliant white light. The sudden illumination froze the would-be thieves in their tracks, temporarily blinding them. In that same moment, her dogs activated their LED vests, creating an otherworldly scene. The sight of two large, professional military dogs in glowing tactical gear, emerging simultaneously from different directions, had exactly the effect she'd hoped for. The intruders' confusion turned to panic as they realized they were dealing with something far more sophisticated than a simple farm security system. The dogs moved with precision, their training evident in every step. They didn't bark or growl, they didn't need to. Their presence alone, combined with the tactical gear and synchronized movement, created an overwhelming psychological impact. The farmer watched as the intruders dropped their tools, their carefully planned heist falling apart in seconds. She stepped out from behind the tree, her own tactical vest reflecting the floodlights. "I suggest you gentlemen stay exactly where you are," she called out, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of military command. "The police are on their way, and my partners here are highly trained military working dogs. They're currently in full control of this situation." The dogs maintained their positions, creating a perfect triangulation with their owner. They showed no aggression, but their alert posture and focused attention made it clear that any sudden movements would be unwise. The farmer could see the intruders processing their options, realizing that they were dealing with a level of security they hadn't anticipated. In the distance, police sirens began to wail. The farmer had requested backup the moment she'd spotted the suspicious activity, and now help was finally arriving. She maintained her position, her dogs staying in perfect formation, ensuring the situation remained under control until law enforcement could take over. As the police cars approached, their blue and red lights adding to the illuminated scene, the farmer felt a surge of gratitude for her four-legged partners. Their presence had turned what could have been a dangerous confrontation into a controlled situation. No violence, no injuries, just the power of training, preparation, and the unshakable bond between a handler and her dogs. The following morning brought an unexpected flurry of activity to the usually quiet farm. Local news vans parked along the gravel driveway, their satellite dishes reaching toward the crisp autumn sky. The farmer hadn't expected such attention, but word had spread quickly through the rural community about how her military-trained dogs had thwarted what turned out to be a notorious group of equipment thieves. As she went about her morning chores, her dogs staying close by her side, she learned that the 3 men caught at her farm were connected to a string of agricultural thefts across 3 states. Their sophisticated operation had cost farmers millions in stolen equipment and damaged property over the past year. The police had been tracking them for months but had always been one step behind. The local sheriff, a weathered man with 30 years of experience, stood in her kitchen sipping coffee. "Your security setup is impressive," he remarked, watching the dogs maintain their vigilant patrol through the window. "We've been trying to catch these guys for months. They've hit at least 15 farms in our county alone." The farmer listened as he explained how the thieves had been targeting specifically vulnerable properties, studying patterns and routines before striking. They'd done their homework on her farm too, but hadn't counted on facing a former military K-9 handler and her highly trained partners. Throughout the morning, neighboring farmers began arriving at her property. Some brought fresh-baked goods or home-cooked meals, a rural tradition of showing support. Others came seeking advice about protecting their own farms. Each visitor marveled at her dogs, who maintained their professional demeanor despite the unusual amount of activity around their home. One elderly farmer, who had lost his entire harvest of equipment the previous month, wiped tears from his eyes as he thanked her. The thieves had been identified with his stolen tractor in their possession, and now he would finally get his livelihood back. The farmer felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing her dogs had helped bring justice to her community. By midday, she found herself hosting an impromptu gathering of local farmers in her barn. The conversation turned to community security, with everyone sharing their experiences and concerns. The sheriff joined them, taking notes and discussing plans to establish a more coordinated rural neighborhood watch program. "What impressed me most," the sheriff explained to the group, "wasn't just that you caught them, but how you did it. No one got hurt, nothing was damaged. It was all about preparation and training." He gestured toward the dogs, who lay alertly at the farmer's feet. "These aren't just guard dogs, they're highly trained professionals who know exactly how to control a situation." The farmer took the opportunity to share some basic security insights from her military experience. She explained how proper lighting, strategic positioning, and regular property patrols could deter most threats. "It's not about confrontation," she emphasized. "It's about making your property a harder target than the next one." As afternoon approached, a representative from the state's Agricultural Association arrived. He explained that farm equipment theft had become a billion-dollar problem nationwide, with rural communities particularly vulnerable due to their isolated locations and delayed emergency response times. The association wanted to feature her story in their monthly magazine, hoping to inspire other farmers to enhance their security measures. The farmers' dogs had become the unexpected stars of the day. The news crews were particularly fascinated by their tactical gear, which had proven so effective in the previous night's encounter. Several reporters asked to film demonstrations of the dogs' training, amazed by their discipline and intelligence. One young reporter asked what made her dogs different from typical guard dogs. The farmer explained that military working dogs are trained to think, not just react. "They understand situations," she said, reaching down to scratch behind her partner's ears. "Last night, they knew exactly how much presence to show, not too aggressive, but firm enough to control the situation. That comes from years of professional training and experience." Late in the afternoon, as the crowds finally began to thin, the farmer received an unexpected call. A representative from a prominent security consulting firm had seen the early news coverage and wanted to discuss developing a training program for other agricultural communities. They were interested in her unique combination of military experience and farming background. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across her fields, the farmer finally had a moment alone with her dogs. They sat together on the porch, watching the last news van drive away. She reflected on how their military service had prepared them for an entirely different mission, protecting not just her farm, but helping to make their entire farming community safer. The dogs remained alert, occasionally lifting their heads to scan the property, a habit that would never fade. The farmer smiled, knowing that their presence had changed more than just one night's outcome. They had helped spark a movement toward better rural security and stronger community cooperation, proving that the skills they had learned in service could make a profound difference in civilian life. In the weeks following the incident, the farmer's life took an unexpected turn. What began as a simple act of protecting her property had evolved into something much larger. The state's Department of Agriculture had invited her to lead a series of workshops on farm security, recognizing that her unique background could help address the growing crisis of rural crime. Early one morning, as frost covered her fields in a delicate white blanket, she stood before her bathroom mirror adjusting her collar. She would be giving her first presentation at the county's agricultural center that day. Her dogs watched her from the doorway, their expressions seeming to sense her slight nervousness. She had faced combat situations with less anxiety than she felt about public speaking. The agricultural center's parking lot was packed when she arrived. Farmers from across the state had traveled to attend her workshop, many bringing stories of their own encounters with equipment theft and vandalism. As she set up her presentation materials, she couldn't help but notice the mix of hope and desperation in their eyes. These were hard-working people who had watched their livelihoods become increasingly vulnerable. Her dogs, still wearing their tactical vests though without the LED lights, drew immediate attention. They moved through the crowd with professional poise, demonstrating the perfect balance of alertness and calm that came from their years of training. Several attendees asked to photograph them, amazed by their disciplined behavior in such a crowded environment. The farmer began her presentation by sharing her own story, but quickly moved into practical applications. She explained how military principles of security could be adapted for farm protection without requiring expensive equipment or armed confrontation. The key, she emphasized, is understanding that security isn't just about preventing theft, it's about creating an environment where criminals don't want to take the risk in the first place. Using her experience with her dogs as an example, she explained the concept of force multiplication, how proper training and strategic positioning could make a small security force seem much larger and more formidable. She shared simple but effective techniques, strategic lighting placement, creating clear sight lines, establishing regular patrol patterns, and the importance of community cooperation. During the lunch break, a group of young farmers approached her with particular interest in her dog's training. They had been pooling their resources to hire private security but were frustrated with the results. The farmer explained how working dogs, when properly trained, could be more effective than human guards in many situations. They don't get distracted, they don't get bored, and they can process environmental information in ways humans simply can't, she explained. One elderly woman shared how she had lost her entire season's profit when thieves stole her harvesting equipment. "I can't afford fancy security systems," she said, her voice trembling. The farmer showed her simple, cost-effective solutions she had learned during her military service, ways to secure equipment using readily available materials and strategic positioning. As the workshop continued into the afternoon, the farmer demonstrated how her dogs responded to different scenarios. The audience watched in amazement as the dogs executed complex commands with precision, showing how their military training translated perfectly to farm security. "These aren't attack dogs," she clarified. "They're highly trained professionals who know how to de-escalate situations through presence and control." The state's agricultural commissioner made a surprise appearance near the end of the workshop. He announced the formation of a new task force dedicated to rural crime prevention, and asked the farmer to serve as a special advisor. Her experience had highlighted the need for a more coordinated approach to farm security. That evening, driving home with her dogs in the back seat, the farmer reflected on how different her life had become. She had returned to the farm expecting a quiet retirement from military service. Instead, she had found a new mission, helping protect the agricultural community that formed the backbone of America's food supply. Back at home, as she walked her property's perimeter with her dogs, she noticed something had changed. The neighboring farms had begun implementing some of her security recommendations. New lighting systems dotted the landscape, and she could see fresh gravel on the access roads, making vehicle approaches more audible. The community was adapting, becoming stronger. Later that night, sitting on her porch with a cup of tea, she watched her dogs perform their evening patrol. Their movements were as precise as ever, but there was an extra sense of purpose in their stride. They too seemed to understand that their role had expanded beyond just protecting one farm. They had become symbols of hope for a community determined to protect its way of life. In her kitchen, she found a stack of letters from workshop attendees. Many shared similar messages, thanking her for showing them that they weren't helpless against rural crime. Some had already started training their own dogs, while others had formed local security cooperatives based on her recommendations. The ripple effects of that one night's incident were spreading, creating positive change throughout the farming community. 3 months after the workshop, the farmer stood at her kitchen window, watching the season's first heavy snow blanket her fields in white. Her dogs lay near the wood stove, their alert eyes tracking her movements as she reviewed the latest report from the Agricultural Commissioner's office. The statistics told a remarkable story. Rural crime in their county had dropped by 60% since the implementation of her security program. The morning's mail had brought an invitation to speak at the National Farm Bureau's annual convention. Her practical approach to rural security had caught the attention of agricultural communities across the country. But what really caught her eye was a photograph included with the invitation, a satellite view of her region at night, taken 6 months apart. The recent image showed a network of strategic lighting systems spreading across the farmland like a constellation, each point representing a farm that had adopted her security recommendations. Her phone buzzed with a message from the local sheriff. Another group of equipment thieves had been caught the previous night, but not at a farm. They'd been found at a truck stop, preparing to leave the state. According to their interrogation, they'd scouted several local farms but found them too well protected to risk targeting. The sheriff's message ended with a simple, "Thank you." The farmer pulled on her winter coat and headed out to check on the livestock, her dogs eagerly following through the deep snow. As they walked, she noticed how the neighboring properties had changed. New gravel access roads crunched under her boots, security lights stood ready for the coming night, and she could see the distinctive reflective collars of newly trained guard dogs at several farms. At the end of her property, she stopped to chat with her closest neighbor, who was installing the latest addition to their security system, a weather-resistant camera setup similar to what she had recommended. They had formed a tight-knit security network, with farmers taking turns monitoring a shared alert system. The sense of isolation that had made them vulnerable was disappearing, replaced by active cooperation and mutual support. Back inside, warming up with a fresh cup of coffee, she reviewed applications for the upcoming training program she developed. Working with local K-9 trainers and fellow veterans, she had created a course to help farmers properly train and handle working dogs for property protection. The program emphasized nonviolent deterrence and situation control, the same principles that had worked so well with her own dogs. The afternoon brought a visit from a documentary filmmaker who was working on a piece about the transformation of rural security. As they walked the property, the farmer explained how her military experience had taught her that the best security systems were often the simplest. "It's not about having the most expensive equipment," she told the filmmaker. "It's about understanding how to use what you have effectively." Her dogs demonstrated this principle perfectly. They moved through their patrol patterns with purposeful efficiency, checking key points around the property without wasting energy. The filmmaker was particularly impressed by how they maintained their discipline even while being filmed, never breaking their focus or abandoning their duties for attention. Later that day, she received a call from a farmers' cooperative in a neighboring state. They had been struggling with a series of costly equipment thefts and wanted to implement her security program. As she talked with them, her dogs suddenly perked up, attention focused on the window. A moment later, she heard the distinct sound of tires on gravel, someone approaching the farm. It turned out to be a local family who had recently purchased a struggling farm down the road. They had heard about her security success and wanted advice on protecting their new investment. The farmer watched as her dogs calmly assessed the visitors, maintaining their protective posture while staying perfectly controlled. As she showed the family around her property, explaining various security measures, she realized how much knowledge she had gained since that night 3 months ago. Each encounter with would-be thieves, each workshop, each success story from other farms had added to their collective understanding of rural security. The family's young daughter was fascinated by the dogs, asking endless questions about their training. The farmer explained how working dogs were like living security systems, but with the intelligence to make complex decisions. "They're not just guards," she told the wide-eyed child. "They're partners who help us protect not just our farms, but our whole way of life." That evening, as darkness settled over the snow-covered fields, the farmer observed the network of security lights coming on across the valley. Each light represented a farm that had chosen to fight back against rural crime, to protect their livelihood and heritage. The scattered farms that had once been easy targets had transformed into a united, resilient community. Her dogs sat beside her on the porch, their breath visible in the cold air as they surveyed their territory. They remained as vigilant as ever, but their job had become easier. The security network they had inspired meant they were no longer alone in their watch. Across the countryside, other trained dogs were taking up similar posts, creating an interlocking web of protection that was changing the face of rural security. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it unexpected news. The farmer sat at her kitchen table, reading an official letter from the Department of Agriculture while her dogs dozed in the morning sunlight. She had been nominated for a Presidential Medal of Agriculture Innovation, specifically for her work in revolutionizing rural security practices. The nomination cited how her program had helped reduce agricultural theft by millions of dollars across multiple states. The morning dew still clung to the grass as she made her daily rounds, her dogs trotting faithfully beside her. The property had changed since that fateful night, not with fancy security systems, but with thoughtful improvements that made it naturally more secure. New hedgerows provided clear boundary lines while channeling potential intruders into easily monitored areas. The gravel paths her dogs patrolled had been carefully planned to maximize coverage with minimal effort. A television crew from a national news network was scheduled to arrive that afternoon. They were producing a special report on the dramatic decrease in rural crime rates, and her farm had become the model for their story. As she prepared for their arrival, she reflected on how her military training had found such an unexpected but perfect civilian application. Her phone chimed with messages from other farmers in their security network. The system they had developed together had grown far beyond their initial expectations. Using a combination of trained dogs, strategic positioning, and community cooperation, they had created something that security companies with millions in technology couldn't match, a human-centered approach that actually worked. The news crew arrived just as she finished her morning tasks. They were particularly interested in filming her dogs in action, amazed by how the animals maintained their military discipline while performing farm security duties. The reporter, a city native, had never seen working dogs of this caliber before. "What makes your approach different?" the reporter asked as they walked the property. The farmer gestured to her dogs, who were demonstrating their patrol patterns. "It's about understanding that security isn't just about keeping bad people out," she explained. "It's about creating an environment where the community works together to protect itself." During the interview, she shared stories of how other farmers had adapted her methods to their own needs. One elderly couple had trained their border collie using her techniques, the same dog that used to chase its own tail and now helped secure their property with surprising effectiveness. Another farmer had organized a cooperative drone program, using her military-inspired patrol patterns to monitor multiple properties efficiently. The camera crew captured footage of her daily security routine, including the subtle ways she communicated with her dogs. Years of working together had created an almost telepathic bond. The slightest change in her posture or the quietest whistle could convey complex commands. The reporter was fascinated by how the dogs maintained constant awareness of their surroundings while appearing completely relaxed. As they filmed, a group of agricultural students arrived from the state university. The farmer security program had become part of their curriculum, and they were there for a practical demonstration. She watched with pride as her dogs helped demonstrate the principles of territorial control and non-confrontational deterrence. One student asked about the challenges of implementing such a program nationwide. The farmer explained that the key was adaptation rather than replication. "Every farm is different," she said, "but the principles remain the same. It's about using what you have effectively and working together as a community." The afternoon brought a surprise visit from a retired military K-9 handler who had driven across 3 states to see her program in action. They shared stories of their service days, but more importantly, discussed how military working dog techniques could be further adapted for agricultural security. Her visitor was impressed by how she had modified tactical training to create a perfect blend of farmyard guardian and professional security dog. As the day progressed, her dogs maintained their vigilant but calm presence, demonstrating exactly what made her program special. They weren't just security tools, they were intelligent partners who understood their role in protecting not just the property, but the entire farming way of life. The news crew captured a powerful moment when a delivery truck arrived unannounced. The dogs immediately moved into position, not aggressively, but with clear purpose. They maintained perfect control of the situation until the farmer verified the delivery was legitimate. The reporter noted how the entire sequence happened without a single bark or show of aggression, just precise, professional control. Later that evening, after the visitors had left, the farmer received a call from the National Rural Security Initiative. They wanted to establish a training center based on her program, with her as the lead consultant. The success of her methods had proven that expensive technology wasn't always the answer. Sometimes the best solutions came from understanding the basic principles of security and applying them intelligently. As darkness fell, she sat on her porch with her dogs, watching the now familiar pattern of security lights emerging across the valley. What had started as one woman protecting her farm had grown into a movement that was changing the face of rural security across the nation. Her dogs leaned against her legs, alert as ever but content in knowing they had helped create something truly special. Summer brought unexpected visitors to the farm. Representatives from agricultural cooperatives in Europe, Australia, and South America had traveled to see firsthand the security system that was making headlines worldwide. The farmer stood in her barn, now converted into a small classroom, facing an audience that represented 5 different countries and spoke multiple languages. Her dogs lay attentively at her feet as she began her presentation, their presence alone demonstrating the professional discipline that had become legendary in farming communities. A translator conveyed her words to the international guests, but the dogs' capabilities needed no translation. Their controlled movements and alert awareness spoke a universal language of security and protection. The farmer shared how her program had evolved beyond her expectations. What started as protecting one farm had grown into a methodology being adopted across continents. Rural crime, she explained, wasn't just an American problem, it affected agricultural communities worldwide. But the solutions she had developed could be adapted to any farming environment. During the practical demonstration portion, she showed how her dogs responded to different scenarios. The international visitors were particularly impressed by how the animals maintained perfect control without any aggressive displays. A farmer from Brazil noted that this approach could be especially valuable in regions where violent confrontations with thieves had become all too common. The goal isn't to create attack dogs, she explained through the translator. It's about developing intelligent partners who can prevent confrontations before they happen. She demonstrated how her dogs used their presence and positioning to control situations, a technique that worked regardless of language or cultural barriers. As they toured the property, an agricultural expert from Germany shared how equipment theft had become a €1 billion problem in the European Union. Traditional security measures had proven ineffective against organized criminal groups targeting isolated farms. The farmer's method of combining trained dogs with community cooperation offered a new approach that didn't rely solely on expensive technology. The afternoon session focused on adapting her techniques to different agricultural environments. An Australian rancher described vast properties where traditional security systems were impractical. The farmer explained how her military experience had taught her that good security was about working with the environment, not against it. Her dogs demonstrated how properly trained animals could effectively patrol large areas by focusing on key access points and using natural features to their advantage. During a break, the farmer received a video call from a South Korean agricultural cooperative that had implemented her program. They proudly showed her their newly trained dogs, working in perfect coordination with local farmers to protect rice paddies and equipment storage areas. The success of her methods in such a different agricultural setting proved their universal applicability. the international attention had brought unexpected opportunities. Agricultural universities in several countries had requested her input on developing rural security curricula. Her dog's training methods were being studied not just for security applications, but as examples of how working animals could be trained to handle complex tasks without aggression. A documentary filmmaker from France captured a powerful moment, and the farmer demonstrated how her dogs handled a surprise intrusion drill. The animals responded with immediate but measured action, controlling the situation through positioning and presence rather than force. The filmmaker noted how this approach transcended cultural differences. It was about protection through intelligence rather than confrontation. As evening approached, the international visitors gathered in the farmhouse kitchen, sharing stories of rural life in their respective countries. Despite their different backgrounds, they all faced similar challenges in protecting their agricultural heritage. The farmers' methods offered hope that these challenges could be met without resorting to expensive or aggressive solutions. The dogs maintained their vigilant but calm presence throughout the gathering, occasionally making their routine checks of the property. Their behavior exemplified what made the program special: the perfect balance of protective instinct and professional training. Visitors remarked how the animals seemed to understand their role in this international exchange of ideas. Late that night, after the visitors had departed for their hotels, the farmer sat in her favorite porch chair, processing the day's events. Her dogs rested nearby, still alert to their surroundings even after such a busy day. She thought about how their story had crossed oceans and language barriers, bringing hope to farming communities around the world. A gentle breeze carried the scent of ripening wheat from her fields. The security lights across the valley winked on one by one, a ritual that was now being replicated on farms around the globe. What had started as a simple act of protecting her property had grown into an international movement, proving that the best solutions often came from understanding universal principles rather than relying on complex technology. Her phone buzzed with messages from the day's visitors, already sharing photos and videos of their experience with their home communities. Each message reinforced how her practical, community-based approach to security resonated with farmers worldwide. The principles she had learned in military service, adapted through her dogs for agricultural protection, were helping preserve farming traditions across cultures and continents. 1 year had passed since that pivotal night when 3 thieves had attempted to break into her shed. The farmer stood at her kitchen window, warming her hands around a cup of morning coffee, watching the sunrise paint the autumn sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Her dogs, ever faithful, sat beside her, their attention divided between their morning vigilance and the familiar comfort of their routine. Today was special. The governor was coming to her farm to officially designate it as the National Center for Rural Security Training. The old barn had been renovated into a state-of-the-art facility where farmers from across the country could learn her methods. Yet despite all the changes, the heart of her operation remained the same: 2 dedicated dogs and their handler, protecting not just a farm, but a way of life. As she walked her morning patrol, she reflected on how much had changed in a year. The statistics told an impressive story: rural crime rates had dropped by 70% in regions that had adopted her program. But the numbers didn't capture the real transformation: the renewed sense of security and community that had spread through farming regions worldwide. Her phone contained messages from agricultural communities as far away as New Zealand and Kenya, sharing success stories of how her methods had been adapted to their unique situations. Each message included photos of working dogs, proud handlers, and protected farms. The universal language of security and protection had bridged cultural gaps and geographic distances. The local sheriff's car pulled up the gravel drive, bringing his weekly update. These visits had become a cherished ritual. This week's report was particularly satisfying: not a single equipment theft had been reported in the county for 3 straight months. The professional thieves had simply moved on, finding the networked farming communities too difficult to target. As the morning progressed, her first training class of the day arrived. These weren't just farmers anymore. There were police officers, security consultants, and agricultural officials, all eager to learn her approach to rural protection. Her dogs demonstrated their skills with practiced precision, showing how military-grade training could be adapted for civilian use without losing its effectiveness. The key, she explained to her students, is understanding that security isn't about creating an impenetrable fortress. It's about building a community that works together, using intelligence and preparation to prevent problems before they start. Her dogs, as if on cue, demonstrated a complex patrol pattern that maximized coverage while minimizing effort. The governor's arrival brought media attention, but the farmer kept the focus on the practical aspects of her program. She demonstrated how simple improvements, when properly implemented, could make a profound difference in farm security. Her dogs performed their duties flawlessly, showing the same discipline they had displayed on that first night, now refined by a year of additional experience. During the ceremony, she was surprised by video messages from farmers around the world. A family in Ireland showed how they had adapted her methods to protect their sheep farm. An agricultural cooperative in Japan demonstrated how her community-based security approach had strengthened their entire farming region. Each message reinforced how her practical solutions had found universal application. The afternoon brought a special moment when a group of veterans arrived. They were part of a new program she had helped develop, training former military personnel to use their skills in agricultural security. Her dogs seemed to recognize kindred spirits, showing particular attention as they demonstrated advanced handling techniques. As the day's events wound down, one of the veteran trainees asked what had surprised her most about the past year. She thought for a moment, watching her dogs maintain their vigilant but calm presence. "What surprised me most," she replied, "was discovering that the same principles that protect our country can protect our farms. It's all about dedication, intelligence, and working together." The governor's office had brought statistics showing the economic impact of her program. Millions of dollars in equipment and crops had been saved, but more importantly, countless farming communities had regained their sense of security. The ripple effects had reached far beyond simple crime prevention, they had helped preserve agricultural heritage for future generations. Later that evening, after the crowds had gone, the farmer sat on her porch with her dogs. The same stars that had witnessed that first confrontation now shone down on a transformed landscape. Security lights dotted the valley, not as barriers, but as beacons of a community united in protecting its way of life. Her phone lit up with a message from the agricultural department. They wanted to expand the training center, adding programs for international students. The demand for her methods had exceeded all expectations, proving that simple, effective solutions could have global impact. As night settled over the farm, her dogs maintained their watch, as professional and dedicated as ever. They had become more than just security assets, they were symbols of how intelligence, training, and cooperation could overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. The farmer took one last walk around her property before turning in. The shed that thieves had once targeted now stood as a monument to rural resilience. Its lights cast a gentle glow across the gravel path where her dogs had first confronted those intruders, a path that had become the starting point of an international movement in farm security. Inside the farmhouse, she found a letter from a young farmer in her training program. "Your dogs showed me that protection doesn't have to mean aggression," the letter read. "They taught me that the strongest security comes from understanding, preparation, and community." The farmer smiled, watching her dogs settle into their evening routine, knowing that their legacy would continue through countless others who had learned these valuable lessons.